Imagine you're locked behind bars. This isn't just a quick stay for a night that got a little too out of control or a simple misdemeanor. You're locked in a cell and you aren't going to be seeing freedom ever again. You've been caught, arrested, arraigned, convicted, and sentenced, and the charges are clear and severe. It's not just a life sentence, it's a death sentence. You won't be leaving prison alive, and this is the end of the road. The next time you leave this cell, it's to the gallows. What would be going through your mind on death row? What are you thinking about at the end of the line, especially when your end is a death sentence that you deserve? You're guilty and you know it. Maybe you try to focus on things that are still under your control. Maybe you distract yourself, come up with some pithy last words. Like James French, who went to the electric chair in Oklahoma in 1966. And as he was being led, he spoke out to the reporters, "Here's a headline for you guys, French fries." Or Jimmy Glass in Louisiana in 1987. His last words were, "I'd rather be fishing, wouldn't we all?" Or maybe you just try to savor and enjoy your Last Supper. Get your mind off your guilt and the bitter end you're about to experience. You'd order something very specific, maybe ultra enjoyable, or maybe a statement meal that's memorable. Like Robert Alton Harris, who ordered 21 pieces of KFC chicken, jelly beans, ice cream, 6 Pepsis, a pack of cigarettes, and after initially choosing 2 Domino's pizza, he changed his mind and ordered 2 Tombstone pizzas, thinking it a bit more poetic. Or like Victor Figuier, who in 1963 ordered a single unpitted olive. And his reasoning was that perhaps when he was buried, the pit would one day grow into an olive tree and it would serve as a sign of peace. What would be on your mind as a prisoner on death row? My guess is if you or me were in that predicament, after we took care of the few things that were still left in our power to take care of, after all was settled, we would be sitting in prison with our fear, our hopelessness, guilt, shame, regret, as a dead end, out of options, and utterly hopeless. There are a lot of themes and messages that simultaneously emerge during the Easter season. Outside of the realm of Christianity, you have Jewish people celebrating Passover. For them, this is a time to commemorate and celebrate the mercy and deliverance of God who saved them out of slavery in Egypt. You have millions of Muslims around the world right now observing Ramadan, focusing on the gift of the Quran having been sent down from heaven. And in the secular mainstream culture of the West, Easter is all about chocolates or rabbits or soft pastel colors. It's about spring and another excuse to spoil children with gifts they don't need. But for many people around the world, Easter is ultimately about Jesus. Magazines run articles about the historical Jesus of Nazareth and his followers and what happened about 2,000 years ago in Jerusalem. Media networks run documentaries and TV series and movies connected and related to the person of Jesus. And upwards of 2 billion people around the world will attend a church service of some kind focusing on the person and work of Jesus, as he is the real meaning of Easter. But even within the realm of Christianity, and even within the person of Jesus, there's a variety of different messages and meaning to be drawn from Easter. Many themes emerge around the story of Jesus, and rightly so. There's the message of salvation, the message of forgiveness, the message of resurrection, new creation, redemption, restoration, vindication, justice. So much game-changing meaning packed into the celebration of the death and resurrection of Jesus. There is one theme, however, that gets to the heart of what Easter means for us. A picture that frames in why the message of Jesus and the meaning of Easter is such good news. It's a metaphor that perfectly explains where we find ourselves in the story and why it's worth celebrating. For those of us who have put our faith in Jesus, one of the central messages of Easter is this: that because of Jesus, guilty prisoners can go free. Meanwhile, Jesus stood before the governor, and the governor asked him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" "Yes, it is as you say," Jesus replied. When he was accused by the chief priests and the elders, he gave no answer. Then Pilate asked him, "Don't you hear the testimony they're bringing against you?" But Jesus made no reply, not even to a single charge, to the great amazement of the governor. Now it was the governor's custom at the feast to release a prisoner chosen by the crowd. At that time, they had a notorious prisoner called Barabbas. So when the crowd had gathered, Pilate asked them, "Which one do you want me to release to you, Barabbas or Jesus, who is called Christ?" For he knew it was out of envy that they had handed Jesus over to him. While Pilate was sitting on the judge's seat, his wife sent him this message: "Don't have anything to do with that innocent man, for I have suffered a great deal today in a dream because of him." But the chief priests and the elders persuaded the crowd to ask for Barabbas and to have Jesus executed. "Which of the two do you want me to release to you?" asked the governor. "Barabbas," they answered. "What shall I do then with Jesus, who is called the Christ?" Pilate asked. They all answered, "Crucify him." "Why? What crime has he committed?" asked Pilate. But they shouted all the louder, "Crucify him!" When Pilate saw that he was getting nowhere, but that instead an uproar was starting, he took water and washed his hands in front of the crowd. "I am innocent of this man's blood," he said. "It is your responsibility." All the people answered, "Let his blood be on us and on our children." Then he released Barabbas to them, but he had Jesus flogged and handed him over to be crucified. If you're familiar with the books of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, you'll know that first, they are all accounts or tellings of the same story, the good news or gospel of Jesus. They're written by 4 different authors. They all tell the same story, but from different angles, perspectives, and paradigms, each with different areas they choose to highlight as it relates to Jesus, who he is and what he did and why it matters so much. Matthew highlights Jesus as the fulfillment of the promises and patterns in the Old Testament, that he is the true Moses, the lawgiver and keeper, and that he is the true fulfilled word of all the prophetic promises. Mark highlights Jesus as the Son of God and the true King of Kings. Luke, the physician and former skeptic, focuses on the specific historical details and proofs of Jesus' identity and accomplishments. And John keys in on Jesus as the pre-existent divine Word of God and how Jesus reveals the true heart and love and nature of who God is. Now, given their different agendas and perspectives, all 4 writers don't include all the same details. Some stories are found in one gospel or 2 of the gospels. For instance, only John tells the stories of the woman at the well in Samaria or the wedding at Cana, while only Luke tells the parable of the prodigal son. There's a lot of variety between each of the 4 gospels. That said, there are a handful of details in the story of Jesus that all 4 gospels highlight. It's as though they're playing the same tune even as they're using different instruments and accentuating different notes. But there are some details included in all 4 Gospels that are at the core, or they're central or baseline or in the key of the good news. The claim that Jesus is the Son of God is consistent in all 4 Gospels. The fact that Jesus taught and healed and performed miracles over a 3-year span throughout Israel is in all 4 Gospels. The fact that Jesus was ultimately hunted down by the religious rulers of the day and betrayed by Judas Iscariot, and that he stood trial under Pontius Pilate, and that he was handed over to be crucified, and that he died and he was buried, and that on the 3rd day he rose again, these details are consistent in all 4 Gospels. And there is this curious little detail about a man named Barabbas. Now, interestingly, all 4 Gospel writers highlight the story of Barabbas. It's as though they're trying to get us to see him as a particular point of focus. Who was Barabbas? And furthermore, why do all 4 Gospel writers insert this person into the story, a person we never saw before this account, and a person we hear nothing about after this account? Why do all 4 Gospel writers zoom in on Barabbas? Well, the first and easiest answer is because it happened. Pontius Pilate really was ruling over Judea at the time. There really were rebels who had been recently imprisoned, and there was a well-known guy named Barabbas. He was a violent man, a convicted criminal, a rebel, a robber, and a murderer. This was a bad dude, and he was imprisoned and sentenced to hang on a cross for his crimes against Rome. But the Gospel writers don't unanimously include him in the story because it happened. There's lots of things that happen surrounding Jesus, even around Easter week, that all four writers don't talk about. They didn't make it into the account. There was something else at work here, some other motivation. Why? Now, great storytellers don't just tell the story, but they tell the story in such a way that the meaning gets clearly communicated to the listener. It's not simply the details of the message that the storyteller wants to relay, but the meaning of the details. We're supposed to find the meaning in the story, to in some way see ourselves in it. And I think that's what all four gospel writers are trying to show us in their telling of the story of Jesus. That Jesus came, and Jesus lived, and Jesus taught, and he performed miracles, and he proved his divine nature, and yet he humbled himself, and he offered himself over to the authorities. He knowingly and willingly went forward to a cross he did nothing to deserve. And then we have this criminal, this Barabbas, who did deserve the cross and who was guilty of the crimes and who had been sentenced to death that he deserved and had no power in and of himself to change his circumstances. And then, one morning, during Passover celebrations, he finds the guards come to his cell to take him out. And he's probably thinking he's about to head to the gallows, and yet he finds himself being brought out before a crowd where Pontius Pilate is there standing before him, and he sees a naked, bloody, broken, and beaten man across from him. And before Barabbas even knows what's going on, he hears Pilate ask the crowd who they want to set free in honor of Passover, because that was the custom. They always let a prisoner off the hook. And to Barabbas's shock, the crowd unjustly asked that he be let go and that the Galilean, this Jesus, this man across from him, be hung instead. This guilty prisoner, Barabbas, goes free. So what are the gospel writers trying to tell us? Why is this story included? That one of the primary things Jesus came to do was to set prisoners free, to pardon the guilty, to pay the penalty for us, that he came to offer himself in our place so that we could go free. Jesus was once asked, "Why did you come?" His answer, "The Son of Man came to give his life as ransom for many." Another time, Jesus said, "I've come to set captives free." Still another time, he said, "He who the Son sets free is free indeed." Here's what the gospel writers are trying to get you and I to see. That I am Barabbas. That you are Barabbas. That we are Barabbas. I am the guilty prisoner that Jesus came to set free by offering himself in my place. You are that guilty prisoner that Jesus came to set free. We are Barabbas. You are Barabbas. I am Barabbas. Here's the truth that Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John are all trying to get us to see. That human beings are guilty prisoners who, left to ourselves, have no hope of breaking free. Now you might say, well, how am I a prisoner? I'm free here today. The gospel writers would tell you this, that we are all prisoners because of sin. That we are all far from God, who is ultimately life and freedom, and that apart from him, we are stuck in a cell of our guilt and powerlessness and our fears, and we ultimately have no control as to what happens to us in the end. And here's the good news, that God so loved the world that he sent his only Son, that whoever believes in him would not perish but have everlasting life. That Jesus was sent here to liberate captives like you and like me, to set you free from your guilt. All of us have sinned, and all of us have fallen short of the glorious standard of God. And yet Jesus came, having lived the completely perfect and righteous life, traded places with us. He frees us from the penalty of our sin, taking it on himself, paying our debt. He gave us his perfect record, and he took our rap sheet. We go free. We no longer have a record of our sin, only a testimony of the goodness and grace of a God who loves us that much. Jesus came to set us free from our bondage. It's not simply that Jesus sets us free from the penalty of our sin and pays our debt before God, but he actually sets us free from the power of sin. When we come to Jesus, his power, his grace, his presence, his truth begins to do a new work in us and to revolutionize who we are. Those things that used to have so much power over us, our struggles, our strongholds, addictions, our propensities, that we always just thought we were stuck with, those things are able to be broken off by His power. Jesus also came to set us free from fear. He not only paid the debt of our past, but He rose again from death as the first of all of us who follow Him. He has power over death, and that those of us who put our hope in Him are invited to trust that He is doing away with all the brokenness in this world, and that in the end, my future will look like ever-increasing glory, life, and liberty. If God is for me, who can be against me? Whom shall I fear, or what shall I fear, if Jesus has arrested death itself? This is the amazing message of Easter for us. It's the great exchange. It's the good news that there is a God who came to deal with the brokenness of this world and the brokenness in all of us. There is a God who came to take on Himself our sin and our fear and our separation from God and the prison that creates, and that He offers us life and freedom in exchange. He was bound so you could be let loose. He was bruised and broken so you and I could be healed and restored. He was shamed so you could be glorified. He was cast out and rejected so that we could be accepted. He was brought low so you and I could be raised up. He was called guilty so we could be made innocent. He was called a prisoner so you and I could be set free and called citizens of heaven. He died so that you and I could live. So what's the message of Easter? It's the good news that through Jesus, the prisoners get set free.